Welcome to the Leadership Table, where leaders of faith, business, and public life share wisdom, stories, and bold ideas. I'm your host, Dr. Kevin Hairston, and today's guest is a pastor, advocate, and a voice of strength in the heart of Columbus. Pastor Derrick Holmes leads Union Baptist Church in Columbus, Ohio. His ministry spans the pulpit and the public square, with a passion for mental health, youth empowerment, and systemic change in our schools and our communities. Pastor Holmes, thank you for being here.
Oh, man, bless you, man. I appreciate it, man. Always good to spend time with you, bro.
Hey, for those who don't know you, and even perhaps for those who do know you, why don't you tell us about your journey in ministry and your journey to Union Baptist Church?
Man, well, again, I appreciate the opportunity to share. I always like to lead with this when asked. I'm a native New Yorker. I love Columbus. I love being here, but I'm from New York City, born in Harlem, raised in the Bronx. And the reason why I always couch that way is because that experience and those influences deeply pour into my being, my theology, my orientation to the empire, the way I understand Blackness, the way I understand Black excellence, the way I understand our people, Black culture, the way I understand kind of ecumenism in a certain type of way. All of those things really stemmed out of my upbringing. And so I never want to get too far from that. Never want to get too far from that. So.
No, I appreciate, because I think that any person who journeys in ministry like yourself and myself and others, we got a story to tell that sometimes people don't get a chance to understand, especially when they see us in this season of our lives. How has it been since being at Union? How has other leaders, or other pastors, or other community people kind of embraced your leadership?
Shout out, by the way, to the historic Union Grove Baptist Church. I love where I'm privileged to serve. In fact, this coming Sunday, will be my pastoral anniversary, be my first year. Things have been amazing. Our church is located in the King Lincoln, Bronzeville community. So it's this historic Black church founded in 1888, deeply connected to Jesus and justice as a discipline. And so for me, given some of my proclivities, kind of where I come down, I believe it to be God to be able to lead as a servant in a place where that's already baked into the fabric of the congregation. And what we've been able to see, what we've been able to do is because of that, the hand of God has really been on the ministry. We've been able to really impact lives. We've seen a lot of the work we're doing around raising health awareness, mental health awareness, programming for young folk, definitely in terms of truth to power, kind of in the moment that we're in. And it hasn't been a struggle. It's not, this is the thing that the pastor's doing and we'll just pray and support them. No, this is what we're doing. And that type of movement has been it's a blessing every day. I know some people are supposed to say that. We're supposed to say that as pastors, right. But I really mean that. I love where it is I serve. I love what it is that we're doing. And I'm really optimistic, really excited about where God's taking us.
You know, one of the things that I smile about, and I probably never had this conversation with you, but I want to say it out loud. I always appreciate, man, the level of love that you even show my way, somewhat as a kind of big brother in ministry type of relationship. And I remember as I was sitting in a barbershop one day, and some of the young guys was telling some stories. And one of them looked at me and said, "Hey, OG, that was during your time." and I remember why the guy was cutting my hair, and I said, "Man, did I make it into that category?" I said, "I'm not there yet."
Nah, don't get it tangled. You are an OG.
But I realized the dimension of, sometimes you graduate to a certain season in a certain age range. But when I reflect and think about ministry, and I think about yourself and other pioneering pastors, young pastors in Columbus, and I go, how is it that, give me your perspective on pastoring during this climate, pastoring during this season of where our world and perhaps even where our city is?
Sure. I think that we're in a moment where the audacity of the Black church, specific to my context, where the audacity of the Black pulpit, the audacity of the Black church needs to be reimagined. I feel very strongly about that. The truth is that the Black church is born juxtaposed to empire, right? And that's not dismissive. When you hear people say things like that, the presumptive thought is that you're saying that this is a separatist type of movement. That's not it. It was just a sociological response to what was going on when Africans were brought to this country, right? And how they navigated spirituality specific to Christianity, right? I think that, to your question, we're in a moment where the audacity of that, where it's not just the goodness and grace and mercy of God, but also the justice and the righteousness of God needs to be articulated in a certain type of way and needs to be said boldly. And I think we're in a moment where a lot of leaders, some of which may be younger than the field, we could have a larger conversation about kind of how clergy end up at pulpits, kind of age, but I think we're in a moment where there are a lot of pastors who may be younger than the field who just kind of understand their moment kind of in a historical context. And so for me and a lot of other clergy colleagues that I have, we just kind of feel like it's our turn, right? Like this is just the moment, similar to Montgomery, similar to the Renaissance, similar to responses out of Brush Harbor spirituality, right? This is just our moment. And I think there's a very deep responsibility to make sure that we're doing that right. So when it's somebody else's moment, when I'm the OG, right, then I'm passing the baton on in a way that's right. And I think this is a moment of courage. I think this is a moment of, again, brazen audacity. And I think there's a moment to do it in genuine self, too. And I think all of those things actually push the church forward. So I think there are these multiple things that are happening at one time.
But you know what? You bring up a great perspective, and that is one of, even when we look back historically, in terms of how the church was connected to social justice.
Sure.
We saw a lot of pioneering leaders during that period of time, especially during the late 40s, 50s, early 60s. And then there was the generational perspective in terms of some young adult groups that were pioneering who had a different perspective, trying to argue for the same cause, but believed that maybe perhaps the approachment was coming from a different angle. And so you saw that generational thought process. How do you think, even in terms of pastoring or ministry, how do you think reflectively people look at the movement that is taking place in our church as to whether or not our churches still have a level of relevancy, that we're meeting the calls in terms of the spiritual perspective, but also answering the call for social justice?
I think that, so again, I think there are multiple things that are happening at one time. I think there's a way in which the church universal understands itself. And like most of us as human beings, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? The challenge with that is that it may be broken or may need to be adjusted and we don't realize it, and we're operating kind of in our comfort zone. And the reality is, the opportunity is to be thinking, to your point, about what it needs to look like specific to the moment. So I think that's happening, right? I think in concert with that at the same time is that the culture is shifting, right? So it's putting the right type of pressure on the church to be relevant, specific to the day. While those two things are happening, there are also leaders, to your point, who are reimagining and rethinking what that needs to look like specific to this. So if we harken back to the 60s, right, it was, ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, right? 10 years ago, it was, we gonna be all right, right? In 2025, it's, hey, what's the point of being woke if you ain't afraid? If you're afraid, right? Like, so I just think that we're in a moment where all of those things are happening. The challenge is that when that happens, you get some pushback because this isn't what we're used to. We're used to the result. So it sounds right, or the ethic is right, right? But maybe I struggle with the presentation. And so that's where, specific to leadership, where there's the opportunity to help people navigate those nuances, that we're not doing something that's antithetical to what we are, what we're about, what's right by God, but also this is what it needs to look like in order to achieve the result. The challenge with that, and I'm not trying to divert, but you have me thinking about this just when you said it. I think the challenge with that is that it forces our contexts to be able to take seriously what they're more connected to, right? Because there's a difference between ritual and tradition. And if I'm more committed to the ritual, then I'll deify the ritual. The ritual can't be touched, right? If I'm more connected to the tradition, then the ritual becomes negotiable. And I think understanding that balance and where healthy leadership is marrying the two, right? It's not an either or, it's a both and it's okay to do this if we're really doing this. And if we're not really doing this, then maybe we should think about what it is that we're doing, right? I think when we're doing it, I think that's where we're seeing the transformation of the church. I really believe that. I really believe that this is our moment. And I really believe the things that we're seeing when you talk about scores of leaders who are reaching out in different type of the way people are rethinking evangelism, the way that people think about movements and connecting people with movements. We were talking about it off camera, but we were at a prayer rally last year. I wasn't at the prayer rally because there was an announcement that was at a church and something happened. I got a text. I got a tweet. I got a tweet that was on my phone. And I was like, oh, well, I'll pull it up. And it just so happened, your name was on it. So I'm like, oh, I'm definitely showing up, right? And so I think it's the reimagining of that lends to the relevance of our context present day. I think that that's the thing that people are going to be talking about in the same way that we talk about Montgomery, in the same way that we talk about Selma. We're going to be talking about 50, 60 years now because we're doing the work of kind of making sure that it's relevant and that it's something that isn't necessarily bound by just ritual. Ritual is valuable, right? But it's more connected to a tradition of righteousness, a tradition of justice, a tradition of truth to power, a tradition that prioritizes the least of these, a tradition that holds intellectualism and spirituality on the same plane, right? I can be anointed and academic at the same time, right? And that didn't just start now. We have a history of that, right? So I'm really excited about that.
Well, one of the things, because you bring up a great observation in that when you talk about the idea of that connection, especially between some of those who's gone before us, and some of those who's gone before us, they're still operating as leaders.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel like it's a challenge in terms of them being able to recognize that change is inevitable, meaning that we have a constituency of young people? And I was talking with some people not too long ago about this. And I said, when you talk about maybe 90% of the individuals on TikTok are between the ages of maybe perhaps 14 and 35.
Right.
But yet 20% of our churches even are logged on as a member of TikTok. Not necessarily saying they're doing anything, but logged on as a member. Is there a disconnect in this generation in terms of it seeing itself being connected with today's church?
I absolutely think there's a disconnect, but I want to be principally critical to the question. I think there's a disconnect, but I think the disconnect makes sense, right? That same demographic that you talked on TikTok literally is the demographic that most churches are trying to reach out to, right? Exactly. So, right, and I think that the reality is when we talk about kind of those shifts, there are people who have just for a long time that have been invested in the thing being a certain way. And that's not a bad thing. When I go to my house, my apartment is the way that I want it to be. The couch is right here. The chessboard is right here, right? It's just the way it is. If I went in here tomorrow and somebody said, no, put the table over here, I'm going to feel a way about it. And depending on how invested I am with the table being there, I might catch an attitude behind it. Right. I might try to go get somebody fired because they done moved this table, right? Tom Rainer has this great book around classic leadership book around Who Moved My Pulpit, right? And kind of talking about the way in which we prioritize certain things. So I do think that there's a disconnect. But I think, and I want to honor that there are people who have invested, some in ways have literally invested their livelihood and their lives connected to the thing being a certain way. Right. And so, yes, change is inevitable. If you ask any sentient person on its face, change being inevitable doesn't sound ridiculous. Everything changes, right? But when you have people who have invested their lives behind it, right? People who have generations of family that are connected to it. I pastor a historic church. There are members who are literally old enough to be my great-grandparents. That's a fact, right? So when I say to them, hey, no, worship only needs to be an hour and 40 minutes long. Whoa, wait, what do you mean? Hey, no, we got to do X, Y, and Z. No, I promise we'll be okay. I have to own, if I'm trying to serve with integrity, that no, there's some people who just get there, honestly, that they have an investment in it. And if I'm not careful, I can dishonor that and even harm somebody by not being aware of the divide that you're talking about and that they get there on. So I do think that there's I think there's a disconnect, but I think what it does, and some of this is just how I approach leadership in general, I think it creates some really great opportunities for kind of collaboration, cohesion, coalescing, right? Because if you're that invested, that means you care about it. And I'd rather give me someone who cares about it who might not agree with the direction than someone who doesn't care that just says yes because I'm doing it.
Right.
Because the second will fold.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, when you look at today's pastor, and you're asking yourself the question that, you know, in some cases, people are asking me to stay in my lane, or there's an expectation for me to stay in my lane in terms of feeding the congregation. You know, my job is to help you understand the Gospels, the epistles, and apply them to your life. But then there's another segment that's calling for me and you, and even within our heart, when we think about social justice or community types of perspectives. And so today's church, somewhat just like the church of maybe 40, 50 years ago, today's church is being able to address things that center around George Floyd. That center around equity in terms of our school system, center around affordable housing, trying to address some issues that are in the forefront of our congregants. But then there are those who say, you shouldn't be in that lane. Leave that up to the politicians. Leave that up to some of the other nonprofit groups. What's your perspective in terms of us diving in to topic margins that didn't seem in terms of the traditional church?
Let me offer, for sake of context, that I am one who attempts to espouse liberative theology. And so my answer is very much connected to what my core theology is. For the person who would say kind of do the stay in your lane, or the, if you will, the shut up and dribble, right? So there's a history of kind of that rhetoric that says you should just be doing this thing. And it normally comes up anytime it disrupts the apparatus. So just as the short answer, we should question the apparatus, right? Because if it consistently happens in all of these veins, church and otherwise, then maybe there's something bigger that's going on that we should have conversation about. Specific to the pastor, what I feel very strongly about is that there's an invitation to maybe dig into some Bible, because Jesus's ministry was very much not connected to Jesus solely being in the temple, right? Bible teaches that he goes to the temple, which is his custom, but Jesus is outside. Right? The Bible teaches us that Jesus is in Galilee, he's in Nazareth, he's in the ghetto. Galilee is juxtaposed to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is where the power is. Jerusalem is the center there. In fact, by the time Jesus gets to the capital, Jesus is disrupting. Jesus is overthrowing tables, right? Which, by the way, is the first Occupy act that we see in the Bible, right? He throws over the tables of money changers. Right? You've turned my father's house into a den of thieves. All right? All this money was being exchanged. The church had been co-opted by the government. So when he does that, right, what ends up happening is he is now decentering the financial structure of the empire. That's just studying Bible. That's not reading Bible. That's studying Bible. So for the idea that the church, where Christ is at the head, right, from in my tradition as a Christian, and certainly as a Baptist Christian, right? If that is the case, I struggle with the idea that the pastor shouldn't resemble Jesus, especially by the time Jesus resurrects and goes back to find the disciples and then says, hey, listen, you go and make disciples, and then tells them where to go, right? To go to these places where there is impoverishment, where there is injustice, where there aren't people who've had a transformative experience with the God of liberation, right? That's Jesus's mandate. I struggle very heavily with the idea that the pastor of a Christian church shouldn't resemble that. And I know that we're not going to get in trouble today, but I wonder that if that is the case, and we're all reading the same Bible, I wonder why more of that doesn't come up, as opposed to you should just stay in your lane and just do this and not address the things that go on around us. How would Jesus respond?
But, you know, but it becomes a critical question, because in some cases we're criticized if we do step out of that lane, and then we're criticized while we're inside of that lane.
Sure.
You know, me and you had some conversation not too long ago, along with even some other pastors, as it related to Columbus City schools. And what I loved about that kind of come together was we were able to talk about some things. And there was a percentage of pieces that maybe perhaps everyone didn't necessarily agree on, but there was a lot of what we did agree on.
Absolutely.
But what my walk away was was that it was important for the faith community to be connected
Absolutely.
to what is happening with our young people's education. Have you ever faced any level of feedback because of your connection to even talking about maybe perhaps mental health,
Yeah.
talking about education within our city, or just the landscape of politics that happen within our city?
Sure, absolutely. And I think, well, let me scale back to go forward. I think a healthy level of critique is necessary. I just believe that implicitly, that that nobody should maybe function without this being kind of checked at some level, right? Just evaluate what best practice is. And part of our job as pastors, as leaders, is to welcome some of that. Again, principled critique. You're not going to talk to me crazy.
Right.
Like I said, I'm from New York. You're not going to. I love Jesus, but they don't play with me, right? But at the same time, right, a principled critique is valuable. That should happen, especially if there's the engagement of the mind. So I want to start there. But there's absolutely pushback, right? Hey, you're pastoring a church, but then you're at this march, or you're pastoring a church, but you're at the State House, or you're pastoring a church, but you're talking about mental health and wellness, and you're pointing it back to what goes on in the Bible, or right? There's always kind of that pushback. It goes back to kind of understanding the thing a certain way. I think historically, there's always the pushback when you're doing the right thing, when you're doing God's work, not everybody's happy, right? Right? And it's also the truth that historically that pushback happens, and historically there are groups that benefit from the work of the few. And if that's the reality, Martin Luther King wasn't popular. Ralph Abernathy wasn't popular. Fred Shuttlesworth wasn't popular. Malcolm wasn't popular. Asada still ain't popular, right? Right? The truth is that and I just started naming heroes.
Right.
I want to be very clear. I just started naming people that I like, right? Jeremiah Wright is not popular, right? Like we can go down the list. Vernon Johns is not popular, right? In a historical lens. Marcus Garvey was not popular, right? W.B. Du Bois was not popular, right? I'm concerned if we have this long-standing history. Oh, and by the way, Jesus wasn't popular, right? Amen. So if we're going down the line of these persons who were just deeply committed to the full work of God, including justice, righteousness, liberation, and it resulted in an unpopularity, my critique is, how do we end up in a moment where there are so many of us that desire to be popular? Right. Maybe we should be. I'm okay if I don't get invited out. Right. I'm okay if maybe everybody isn't screaming my name. Right. Because I understand the orientation to leadership to be that I'm showing up to serve. And the applause isn't guaranteed. Right. What's guaranteed is that the God that's with me is greater than the enemy that's in front of me. Does that make sense?
No, I think that's a good word, and it kind of leads me to think about what I think one of your passions are, and that's about mental health.
Absolutely.
And the idea, like you said, that there are heroes that are attached to our community that were not necessarily popular, even down to the scale of even when we look at Christ. But one of the things that has become kind of a go-to type of language is mental health. Yeah. And when I talk about it with different groups, I always go, maybe perhaps 20 years ago, we didn't talk like we do. Right, and if we would even go back a little bit further than that, there was still that taboo in terms of, hey, you're talking to a therapist, you're talking to a psychiatrist, you must have some real issues. And so we stayed away from those things. And so even inside of our community, we didn't really bring up certain subject matters. And then, Pastor, when I look back even over on my personal family, I'll go, that person had some issues. Yeah. But growing up, we just said,
that's just how he is. That's how she is.
You cray-cray. That's how they are. Right. And there was a disconnect and you saw the dysfunction take place. And then 30 years later, you go, what would it have looked like had they sat down with somebody? Yeah. Not so much so that the family could afford it, but what would have it looked like if they would have gone through this route? Yeah. And so we hear now that term about mental health. We're hearing it more in our pulpit. And one of the things that I think is on the rise is not just mental health as it relates to our congregants, but mental health as it relates to us as clergy.
Absolutely.
What's your perspective on even pastors finding an outlet to be able to talk with someone while they're struggling with self-care?
I accepted my call when I was 27 years young. I discerned call at 13. And I thought it was ridiculous. I just started hooping. I'm really on these girls for real. Like, I'm not doing no, I'm not doing that. That's crazy. As you all know, the call doesn't let you go. At 27, sitting in a church, I discerned. It wasn't a voice like James Earl Jones talking from the heavens, but I could sense the Lord saying, how long are you going to tell me no? I went to my pastor. To talk to him about it. And I'll never forget what he said. Two things. One, which is one of his going statements. Well, is that what the Lord told you to do? All right, we should just do that, right? Like, that was it. And then the second thing he said was, if you're serious about ministry, you need to be serious about counseling, and you need to get you a therapist. It was the first thing he said. He didn't tell me to go get a Bible. He didn't tell me, he didn't talk to me about seminary. He didn't do any of that. The first thing he said, if you're serious, you need to take seriously counseling, because people deal with stuff outside of Sunday, right, and you have to be able to minister to it. And the next thing he said, you have to get yourself a therapist. And it has been a blessing to my ministry. I'm now with a new therapist, but I had a therapist, the same therapist for 20, so I'm 47 now. So maybe just now 3, so 25 years, had the same therapist, and he retired. I now have another therapist, and she's amazing. She's really good. I say that, I give that backdrop because there was a real period in ministry where I dealt with something that was very lonely. I had my best friend and my grandmother, who raised me, die in the same week. And all I knew was to get up on Sunday and preach. And I didn't have a place to unpack that. It was what Henri Nouwen calls the wounded healer, right? I didn't have a place to put that, trying to take care of folk. And so many of our brothers and sisters in the call don't have a place to unpack the real things that happen, the real moments of depression. Right. Preaching is a very individual enterprise. By virtue of that, as a human, you have moments where you deal with loneliness, right? Moments of depression, moments where the things that may have previously gone unchecked around mental unwellness that we've stigmatized in our community in a certain type of way. And that's why we dismiss when Unc is that way or when Auntie is that way. We just say that's the way they are. We just be like, you just a little cray. I'm just going to leave you over there. And we make up rules around it, to your point, as opposed to what if they had the access to help. Dr. Angelo says that when you know better, you do better. We know better. And there's nothing wrong with saying that, hey, maybe I'm in a low place. I need somebody to talk to. Hey, I'm not thinking clearly. Maybe I need someone to talk to. Hey, I'm having an ideation. I'm considering self-harm. All the things that are deeply connected to depression that we dismiss all the time. We glorify folk when they do it because we think we've created this narrative where you're supposed to die on the vine. That is not of God. Jesus died for all of this. I shouldn't be doing that. My book says I should have life and that more abundantly, and that I should be loving God with not only my soul, my strength, but also my mind. So if my mind should be connected to the divine, if I'm submitting that means that I should be taking care of it. And so I think specific to a clergy person, and quite frankly for everybody, including the community I care the most about, we should be going out of our way, and especially in 2025 when there are so many resources, many of them are even free because it's so much of an epidemic at this point, that we should be tapping in and doing all that we can to connect. My ministry is better. My ministry is better in ways that I wouldn't have even thought of. You know, when you first accept a call, you're just thinking about, preach and teach, right? I had no idea the number of lives I would be able to connect to, the persons I would be able to serve, because I was able to serve them in a counseling capacity. After the benediction, that we can have a conversation about what's really going on, and I can give some insight to what God might be saying around that and how you navigate that. And then lend to somebody's wellness. So I think it's extremely important. I don't think it's something that we should play with. I think we're in a moment where there's so much going on around us that we should be navigating our wellness. That's what happened when the administration shifted at the beginning of the year. That's really what happened. They're collective. We didn't have an announcement behind it, but there were just a bunch of people that said, no, wait, I need a minute. If you notice, remember, it was real quiet. There wasn't no tweets. There wasn't no marches. There wasn't no protesting. We need a minute. We just need to stop and just recenter. So, so that was very much the time, very, very much the time that we're on. I think it's important that we really hold space for that, and that we really push people toward it. One of the things we try to do is really prioritize that in a certain way. Starting in September, we're going to be offering free counseling at the church.
That's good.
Where people can come. What we've seen is that as we're connecting with schools around us, when we're talking to teachers and folk, what they're saying is that they can't afford to go to a therapist. So they're dealing with the pressure that comes with being an educator. I got to be the teacher and the parent and the guidance counselor and the coach and all these other things, right? And they just don't have a place to unpack that. We're going to be able to provide that resource in their community. People can literally get off of work and then come to the church and not have to come out your pocket, but have somebody to be able to talk to so that way you can be okay. So I think it's extremely important, man.
No, Pastor, I appreciate everything that you shared, and I appreciate your vulnerability. Excuse me. I appreciate your vulnerability to be able to even share about those of us who are clergy and the need to be able to have an outlet to be able to talk with somebody.
Yeah.
So many of us feel as though maybe perhaps they're embarrassed or ashamed, or that Superman complex.
Right.
To think that, our job is to make the congregants think that we don't have problems. We don't have any issues.
Right.
When sometimes we're the first person who has to digest that sermon and learn how to live it.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate that. Let me just give you some final words. If you were about to share with our listeners, our viewership, on mental health, on leadership, give us some final words of wisdom.
Again, I really appreciate the space to be able to share, man. Let me say that I think that we are in a moment where this is our time. I really believe that with everything that's going on around us, what is needed is that we as a culture, we as a people, we as a community, we as daughters and sons of God need to really be about the business of God, and that is making it on earth as it is in heaven. And that does not happen without us leaning into the work. And part of that is that we really have to sharpen our function as servant leaders. Now is the time for us to get our thing right. Now is the time for us to really take seriously the platforms we have, the pulpits that we preach and teach from. We need to start understanding our institutional power in a certain type of way. The oppressor should not understand our power better than we do. And I really think that we're in a moment where there's a need for sound, integrous, purposeful, strategic, compassionate leadership. I really believe that. We could have a larger conversation about getting to the point where we don't have where it should be leaderless movement. And I do think that that's valuable, but that moment is not right now. I hoop. Right. So listen, at some point, look, you just got to play against what the defense give you. Look, you can't wish it away. Right. Amen. Look, they're in a zone. We just got to switch our thing. Right. And I just think we're in a moment where we just need to be very intentional about that as leaders. And for those of us who are privileged with leadership, I think we have to get past our stuff. Right. Look, the bottom line is you're the leader. You might not be perfect, but until the next person get here, that's what you got. Right. And you have the opportunity to do something, to build something, to serve people, to elevate communities in a way that's transformative. And I want to be part of that. And I want to invite everybody who's watching this in whatever capacity you're serving in leadership to be involved with that. Because the things we're doing now, the things we're building now are going to be the things that last for generations to come. And only the things we do for God are the things that are going to stand.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it right from his mouth. Words of wisdom about leadership, words of wisdom about compassion. If you're in the Columbus area, if you're visiting, if you're Googling online, you want to check out Union Grove Baptist Church with Pastor Derrick Holmes. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to appreciate this gentleman for reminding us about real leadership that's rooted in faith, compassion, and has the courage to confront issues that matter. Thank you for pulling up a seat to the leadership table. Pastor Holmes, thank you for being here. Want to remind you again, please click on the links below so that you can subscribe and become a listener to this program. And so until the next time we come together, I'm Dr. Kevin Hairston. And remember to always keep the faith as we keep in touch.
Boxland Media. Think big,